Is your truck stop on Uber Eats? Is your truck stop on Grubhub? Because I know this sounds crazy, but we have truck stops that have that. The drivers will pay the fee to have that food delivered to their truck from the truck stop.
You're listening to the Future of Convenience podcast, brought to you by Global Convenience Store Focus, featuring senior retail executives and experts in the global convenience, fuels, and mobility retail industry. Hosted by Dan Munford, Nick Scherzer, and Carolyn Schnare. Welcome to the Future of Convenience podcast. I'm Carolyn Schnare, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Nick Scherzer. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Carolyn. How are you today?
I'm doing great. And today we're going to talk about truck stop trends here in the U.S. and around the world on food, fueling, customers, and more. Before we get started, Kempower designs and manufactures reliable and user-friendly DC fast charging solutions for electric vehicles. The company's vision is to create the world's most desired EV charging solutions for everyone, everywhere. Kempower's product development and production are based in Finland and the U.S., and most of the materials and components are sourced locally. The company focuses on all areas of e-mobility, from electric cars, trucks, and buses to machines and marine. Learn more at kempower.com. So today we're going to talk about truck stops or travel centers, or what do you call them over there in Europe, Nick?
Motorway services.
So Darren Schulte is the Vice President of Membership at NATSO. Darren, welcome to the show.
Hello, Nick. Hello, Carolyn. Nick, it's great to see you again.
You too, Darren. And over the years, NATSO's joined us here in Europe on a number of our retail market visits. And I know you've come on a number of other trips to Europe with your retailer members. So it's always been fun to spend time with you guys and share ideas from across the pond.
Well, I thank you, Nick. It's I will tell you, as I tell all of our members and non-members, if you're a truck stop travel center operator in the United States, you need to go on one of those tours. They are by far some of the best that I've ever experienced, and that's why I continue to attend them.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and I mean, like I said, it's a fun exchange in terms of contrasting and comparing different approaches to retailing, to what we call motorway service sites. You guys call truck stops, essentially. But a lot of the principles and underlying basics of those are the same, but different ways of delivering it. Obviously, here in Europe, the distances can be a lot shorter than traveling across the United States. So that's always a fun comparison and conversation to have as well.
Indeed. One trip across Texas is like a trip across Europe.
Exactly.
Nick and I always joke. He's always like, why is your country so big? When he's like, hey, can you just pop over to California for a minute to go see something? And I'm in Virginia. I'm like, I can get to you in London faster than I can get to California.
Yeah, when folks will say, hey, Darren, I'm in Dallas. I live in El Paso, Texas. So they'll be like, hey, I'm in Dallas. Let's have dinner tonight. I'm going to say, well, unless you have your own private jet, I won't be seeing you for dinner. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, about 600 miles north of me. So,
wow. So, Darren, just for our listeners are from all over the world, both here in the U.S. and international. So, can you tell us a little bit about NATSO, the members you represent, and what your role is there?
Sure. I'll start with my role. I'm the Vice President of Membership, and my key responsibility is recruiting and retention for the association. But that's really kind of morphed into almost like a mini consultant for the association. And what I mean by that is I spend most of my time in the field. Pre-COVID, it was about 40 weeks a year in the field with members, helping them improve their profitability, looking at ways, whether that's in site, the site layouts, designs of the stores, what type of products they're offering, pricing optimization, you name it. I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. So it kind of gives me an insight due to the fact I see so many locations annually. NATSO itself is a trade association based out of Alexandria, Virginia, and our specific niche market is truck stops and travel centers in the United States, and we do have some international members as well. We focus primarily on federal rules and regulations that could negatively impact our industry and or positively impact our industry, along with training, education, and knowledge for those members.
Very cool. Thank you for letting us know about that, because I wanted to talk to you. I was reading a report that you recently released called Top Travel Center Trends. And it's based not only on your NATSO research on drivers and travel centers, but your own observational insights and whatnot, like you said. So I just really quickly wanted to differentiate one of the things that you mentioned in there between professional drivers, which is the truck drivers, if you will, and four-wheel drivers. So I know NATSO, you have a very diverse customer base, even more so than convenience stores, which is what Nick and I work with most because but I should also add too that those are blurring a lot too, because a lot of our convenience store companies that we work with are also getting more and more into the travel center business as well. So going back to the report, can you tell us some of the findings that you found about that? Maybe we can start with drivers and some of the trends that you've noticed that are changing.
Sure. So I think for those that are not familiar with the United States trucking industry, you primarily have three types of drivers. And a lot of times folks will just break it down into two types of professional drivers. Those are your company drivers, those who drive for a company. They're often referred to as fleet drivers. And those that are called owner operators, those that actually own their trucks. Some folks will break it down to leased operators as well. Someone who owns their truck, he or she then drives for a fleet. But for the most part, you're looking at owner operators and fleet drivers. And the reason we like to highlight that, especially for folks that are not familiar with our space, is they're very, very different customers. So a fleet driver, for example, he or she does not pay for their diesel fuel. So that type of customer, when he or she comes to your property, their purchasing habits are often very, very different. They may or may not need a place to stay because they may be a day driver, which I'll speak about a little bit later. So it's almost like you and I all renting a car, for example. We don't own that vehicle. We're on business, and how we shop when we're driving our personal car versus when we rent a car is again very, very different. The owner operator, he or she owns that vehicle, so they live in that vehicle. So they may buy antennas, for example. They may buy CBs. They may buy chrome. They may buy other types of merchandise and products for that vehicle that a fleet driver would never even consider. Again, it's no different than us. We're in a rental car and the hubcap falls off. We're not going to AutoZone and buying it. Yeah, we're not going to AutoZone and buying a new one. We're just standing in front of the tire. Hopefully, when we check the car out, nobody notices it's missing. So that's really your primary difference between those two customers. So again, someone who owns their truck and someone who doesn't own their truck.
Interesting. And how have you seen, to dig in a little bit more on that, obviously the way they think and operate and come into a store, and we can get into food and stuff later, but they're coming in their shop, like you said, shopping for merchandise maybe, or truck parts differently. But are the demographics of those drivers changing that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So to dig in, as you referenced, a little bit deeper, so within those communities of owner operators and fleet drivers, you have day drivers, drivers that are essentially just driving their truck for a day. They may or may not have sleeper cabs on their truck. If their truck doesn't have a sleeper cab, or as they may say, the lorry doesn't have a sleeper cab on it, that driver doesn't necessarily need overnight parking, for example. There's been a huge increase in what we call box trucks. These are vehicles that are 27 feet and below. They may or may not be fueling in the forecourt. They may fuel in the forecourt versus fueling in the backcourt, which is what we call our diesel area. So that type of customer could be Nick and could be you, Carolyn. You don't need a CDL. You don't need a commercial driver's license. So anything 27 feet and below, that driver is really it's critical for speed. He and she is in and out of your truck stop very, very quickly, very similar to a convenience store. So those things are changing dramatically. When I started 30 years ago, it was common for a truck to leave the port of Los Angeles and drive all across the United States on Interstate 10 to Tampa Bay, as an example. Well, in today's world, that truck may travel the entire length of Interstate 10 between those two cities, but it may be a different driver. So think of like a Pony Express model. Or there may be situations where the truck starts in LA, it goes to Phoenix, and it drops the trailer. And then he or she hooks to another truck and drives it back to LA. And then that truck goes from Phoenix to El Paso. So if you can imagine, the truck or the freight continues to move across the United States, but not necessarily the driver. And these changes in our industry have really impacted our industry, because before, for example, there was a direct correlation between a full parking lot at nighttime, and you'd go inside to a truck stop or a travel center. It'd be very, very busy at night, and there'd be lots of customers eating meals at night, sitting down. Now, with the ability to use your phone as an example, you may go to a truck stop or travel center late at night, and they're having Uber Eats or Grubhub delivered to their truck, or they're taking an Uber off the property to go downtown and eat at a restaurant, for example. Those are still small percentages as an overall number, but they're certainly happening, and they're definitely impacting our space. It's much more common. We'll get into food in a second, but it's really impacted our food landscape dramatically from where we were 30 years ago to where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, it kind of segues into the importance of the service and the offer that your retailer members and truck stop operators provide in terms of the amenities there and the food service level of what's there. Tell us about, I'm interested to hear a bit more about how that food service model has changed so much that you were talking about.
Absolutely. I think just in general, the whole idea of speed has become very critical to the American professional driver. With all the infrastructure issues that we have in the United States, and with the rules and regulations that essentially only allow a driver to drive a certain number of hours in the day, speed has become paramount. So if you think of yourselves again, if we were timed, if we were going to see grandma and there was only a certain number of hours we could drive before we had to pull over, so we were in compliance with federal law, it would change how we might go into a travel center. So 30 years ago, drivers had a lot of time, and a lot of the drivers drove late at night. It was cooler, there was less cars on the road and so forth like that. Now you go into a truck stop and everyone's kind of being forced off the road truck wise almost all at the same time. And again, throughout the United States, there's different areas where you wouldn't see this happening. But essentially, in a truck stop today, by 5 or 6 o'clock, it is completely full. The parking lots are. So the drivers are now, just being forced to get off the street. Well, what's that done is, again, during the day where they might have sat down and had a breakfast, for example, not happening anymore. Grabbing some food and off they go. Same thing during lunchtime. Again, 30 years ago, the lunches would be packed. The drivers would be parked. They'd be inside eating a nice lunch. Not doing that anymore. So food has gone from a full service restaurant that maybe Carolyn might even remember from her days as being young. You go down to the local truck stop and get your really great breakfast. Not that doesn't exist, but now it's been replaced by grab-and-go foods, hot offerings, and the times. It's not like a 6 or 7, 8 o'clock breakfast run for us. It might be a 4 o'clock breakfast run. What I mean by that is the parking lot may empty at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So the food is really kind of matching that. So what we find is folks that only have a full-service restaurant struggle. Folks that only have a QSR that's limited of when its hours are open may or may not have the success. Those that have a robust grab-and-go food program, both hot and cold, it could be a proprietary food program, whatever it may be, are the ones that are doing very, very well. Folks that have entered our space that have made-to-go or made-to-order programs, they're quickly adjusting those. And it's not that they're not going forward with those programs, but they've realized that 5 or 6 minutes waiting in line, while again, we three may not think that's a big deal, if you only have a 25-minute break in your hours of, say, 10 hours of driving, taking 1/5 of that time to wait in line, if you're a professional driver, has a huge impact on that. And we like to talk about fueling it in that way, so that the food folks can understand it. Fueling a truck is very quick. It takes about 3 minutes because it's 30 gallons to 50 gallons, depending on the equipment, per minute. So if your average fill is 100 gallons of diesel fuel, they filled that tank by 3 minutes. but the whole process takes between 15 and 20 minutes because the truck pulls in, they get out, they throw their trash, they clean their windows, clean their lights, and then they professionally pull forward one length of a truck and then get out and come inside. So if you're that second truck in line, that's now 30 minutes of wait. If you're the third truck in line, that could be 45, 60 minutes. So now when you come inside to get your food, you're looking to grab food and get it out quickly. So
it's there are obviously a lot of similarities between, cars and trucks, but I didn't realize it was 3 minutes, which is about the same time it says for a convenience store visit for a person in a car. But I guess, the same struggle is to get them in the store. And you said a lot of drivers are parking, Ubering, which I would never have thought they would do, but that's an interesting concept. So what are some tips for travel center operators to get them, or truck stop operators to get these drivers into the store? So what are some of those food service recommendations you have besides speed to really just entice them to stay there and eat there, or at least get the food there, maybe not stay and eat?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, you really need to understand who your driver is. I think that's critical. I know that's sometimes easier said than done, but I think that's one of the first things you have to understand is if you're trying to offer, for example, a type of food that doesn't match who your demographic is, you're probably not going to be necessarily successful. So I'd say that's one thing for sure, is really understand who your demographic is. Number two is whatever food trends are out there, truck stops can sell them really well. Would you like to guess what our number one selling item for one of our very large members out of their cold case is? Out of their reach-in cold case, what would you think the food item would be the number one selling item in that? Sushi.
Wow.
Sushi. I was going to say, I'm glad you said food, because I was going to say, I hope it's not a Bud Light.
Yeah,
that was the first thing that came to my mind as well. And then I heard you say food, but I would not have guessed sushi.
Yeah. So as an example, and then, for East Asian, Pakistani, Indian food is incredibly popular with us. We have members that have proprietary Indian food programs in the middle of Missouri, in the middle of Iowa. So this is not just if that's your customer type, that are producing $50,000, $60,000 a month in sales, doing more than what Subway would do, for example, in a truck stop or travel center. So I'd say number two is whatever trends are out there in food. Those travel centers that take advantage of that often do really well. How you get that customer to come inside, if you have an app, the ability to order food, the ability to deliver food to their trucks. So if you're a truck stop, do you have, the scan codes? So just think about that. You're fueling, you scan it, a menu pops up, you look at it, you place your order, no different than you would at a Starbucks or somewhere like that. And by the time you're done fueling at that 15 minutes total is, now you go inside and you grab your food and you're not waiting in line, right? So that type of stuff I think is critical. For those trucks that are parked at nighttime, same thing. Is your truck stop on Uber Eats? Is your truck stop on Grubhub? Because I know this sounds crazy, but we have truck stops that have that. The drivers will pay the fee to have that food delivered to their truck from the truck stop, right? No different than all of us here. So, we all do kind of funny things when it comes to delivery, and that same type of situation exists with drivers.
Yeah, and I think, just thinking about the convenience retail industry for passenger vehicles and drivers, I think those principles just kind of ring true across the industry widely. It's about providing your customers with something new, innovative that they really want. And, it was interesting you referencing the different types of cuisine that some of the successful truck stop operators have introduced and are being very successful with, and kind of comes down to flavor and exceeding customers' expectations, be they professional drivers or people on the move.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. You said something really interesting. One of the the most interesting things I find in this business now that I've been doing it for 30 years is we somehow think the professional driver is different than us three, and they're not.
Mm,
They have the same needs,
exactly.
the same wants, those types of things. The only difference is their job is driving a vehicle, so they're on the road all the time. So they have some other amenity needs that we three might not think about. But when it comes to food, it's all the same. And good quality, fast food trumps everything these days. And we find that those operators that are really focused on speed, it really makes a difference to the professional driver.
Yeah.
Just like safety, right? If a store is clean, we perceive it to be safe, us three. Same thing as a professional driver. When you do those surveys, they will say, when I am looking at a truck stop, if it's clean, I feel it's safe. So that's another way to get that professional driver to get into your store once they've parked. Is your parking lot clean? Is it a free for all? Right? If it's a free for all, they may not want to walk through the parking lot to get in. Is it well lit, and those types of things. So I really always tell our members when we're working on trying to how to improve business is you don't have to complicate this. If you just use some basic common sense things and apply that to the professional drivers, I think you'll find that you'll have really good success doing that.
Yeah, Darren, it comes down to doing the basics really well. Keep it simple. It's common sense, but you've got to execute and do it really well. And that's the tough part for sure.
Yes, easier said than done. Nick, I have almost 65 million views on my two Google platforms where I take pictures. I started taking pictures of truck stops in April of 2016, and I'm closing in. I think actually closing in on 70 million views, and the views are primarily of the restrooms, of food, and of outside appearance. Wow. So when I look at what is clicked upon by far the most, it's those three things. And again, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
So let me ask one question too. So, we talked a lot about the U.S. and our vastness, and both of you are world travelers. So Nick, let me start with you then real quick. When you think of your travels everywhere from South Africa, especially in Europe, are some of the same things that you're seeing that Darren is seeing here, sushi, for instance, are you seeing a lot of that globally? Are you seeing a lot of the same differences in cultural food and food offers in some of the motorway visits that you've been on recently?
Yeah, I think, certainly here talking about Europe and thinking about Europe, you do see that, and it's regional and it changes regionally, but there's certainly, some really good operators delivering exceptional standard of foods. I think if kind of focusing in maybe on the UK where we are, the motorway services that provide amenities to both truck drivers as well as passenger vehicle drivers, they tend to offer branded QSRs more frequently than providing a wider range. But I think that sushi for sure is part of the mix, and it's something we've seen around in the world, both in convenience stores and roadside locations where you wouldn't necessarily expect to find that. And I think it kind of goes to that point of just providing something different and innovative that customers are looking for.
And Darren, same question over to you. When you leave our borders here, when we cross a pond one direction or another, have you seen that, and is that an opportunity for some of our listeners?
An opportunity, absolutely, and I've seen it. Yes, so I think of last year when we were in Dublin, seeing the travel centers on the motorways there, very very focused on food. Certainly, the food that Ireland does, I feel it's some of the best around how they do their food and their offerings. We can't get away with some of that for city regulations or county regulations in some of our places in the U.S. But I think their food offerings are fantastic. And we were at a travel center that was offering Indian food. We were at a travel center that was offering Asian food. That being in Dublin. So I think you see a lot of those types of similarities. When I look at the travel centers in Europe, I think of those that are most similar to the United States as the ones in Dublin. Dublin, maybe the ones also in Poland, as an example. Netherlands to a lesser extent, maybe Norway as well. But I think you can really learn a lot from the travel centers that are in Dublin related to food offerings, a combination of a QSR, maybe a proprietary QSR, and then really robust grab and go food programs. And so I see a lot of similarities in some of the countries over there.
Absolutely. And I mean, certainly Dublin is one of those markets, both for travel center locations as well as convenience store industry, that just really excels and has pushed the boundaries in terms of food service within convenience and retail for customers on the go. Darren, maybe, I mean, just changing subjects for a moment, or themes, just interested to hear in the US if what you're seeing from an electric trucks charging point of view. And the reason I bring it up is just we're kind of it's a topic we've been closely watching, and particularly in the passenger vehicle market here in Europe, but just really seeing a push forward in Europe for building out charging infrastructure for trucks, and different consortiums putting that infrastructure across Europe, really, and the increase in electric vehicle trucks driving. Just interested if that's something you're seeing in the US now and the impact it's having.
Certainly. So I think there will be a time where electric trucks will have some sort of impact here in the United States. I'm essentially 60 years old. I'm not so sure I will see that in my lifetime, but I do believe there will be a time where it will have some sort of impact. I do think, at least on the Class 8 trucks, I've always been a strong believer that hydrogen will eventually kind of become one of the driving forces here in the United States. Yep. And or clean burning diesel fuel. There's a lot of talk, like in Formula One and other places out there nowadays, about clean burning fuels that could work in an ICE engine. I do think what we are seeing the biggest impact on, at least on gasoline here in the United States, and I'm specifically speaking about travel centers and truck stops, is mile per gallon improvement. So when we look even at today's diesel truck and how many miles per gallon it gets versus 120 years ago, it's significantly improved. And I think that's having a much bigger impact on our industry, vehicle and mile per gallon improvement, and then on the diesel side as well. Vehicles can just go a lot longer and don't have to stop as frequently as they did, even a short 10, 15 years ago. Truck stops and travel centers that are in areas where an electric vehicle could leave in the morning, let's say a box truck, for example, and make its deliveries and then go back and charge for the night. I think those travel centers are going to be impacted at a much quicker rate related to the diesel volume in those locations, because those box trucks may be gas and or diesel powered. And if they can go back, say within 150 or 200 mile range, I think that will have it. And as I referenced, as the length of haul begins to shrink, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, then the practicality of an EV starts to make more sense, if that makes any sense. If we're talking the length of haul is 800 miles, the time horizon for that's much, much further down the road. But if we're talking about 150 miles or 180 miles or 200 miles, all of a sudden that shrinks. But what is of interest, at least what I see today in the U.S. market, which I find very, very, very funny, related to any EV vehicles, all those EV chargers are up against a curb. And I find that really, really fascinating. So I've said this many times in some blogs and other things where I've been speaking, is if I'm in a Ford F-150 Lightning and I have a trailer on the back, you're expecting me to unhook my trailer, pull up my F-150 and charge it. That is not a natural practice. So I'm always suggesting to people, if you're going to put in EV chargers, you should think of the Norwegian model, where it's kind of more of like a parking lot, right? And the vehicle can just pull up, charge, and then leave. So that hasn't really resonated with many of our members. Maybe, someone will listen to this and say Eureka, but it just never makes sense to me, because I've always hearing that once pickup trucks in the United States are electric and that gains more share because we sell so many pickups here in the United States, it'll really kind of be a tipping point. But we're sure not making it easy for someone who has a pickup truck towing a trailer, which so many of them do, whether it's their boats or their ATVs or whatever it may be, landscapers. We're not making it easy for them to charge those vehicles here in the U.S.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And from a kind of consumer point of view, all of that whole experience needs to be really clearly thought through to avoid the kind of issues that you're talking about. And also, you make a very good point when you're talking about the electrification of fleets, the distance and what the purpose of that journey is, and almost very kind of broadly break it down into three, where we see a lot of electrification, certainly in the Scandinavian markets, of commercial delivery vehicles delivering within cities during the day, where the barrier is a lot lower, or those much shorter journeys that are under 200 miles, logistics, and then the barrier and the challenges get higher for the long haul. But it's just been interesting to see what's happening on the ground here in Europe in terms of a push to build out that infrastructure, as both from operators but as well from the truck manufacturers. And so it's starting to move here. But
and Nick, and just to top that, travel centers and truck stops really are fuel agnostic. And we mean that very, very honestly. We don't care what's powering the vehicle, whether it's peanut butter, electric, or as long as we have the ability to, profit from that.
Yeah.
And travel centers are really set up well in the United States to support an EV rollout. So we're set up well for that, and we would welcome that. And so we'll see what the future holds.
Well, Darren, this has been really insightful, especially talking about the food and the EVs, and really just keeping the customer experience and the customer journey in mind, I think is just key to listeners and of any size, whoever your customers are, whether they're very, very many wheels or just four-wheel passenger cars. So, Darren, I know NATSO has a podcast, which you're on occasionally, the Truck Stops Here. Where else can listeners hear more and see more and read more about you and also the report we referenced in the beginning?
Well, thank you. So certainly NATSO, even if you're an international member, as a reference, we do have international members. We'd love to have you as a member. A lot of the stuff that we have, of course, is member driven. So if you're part of NATSO, you get to have these publication surveys and so forth as part of your membership. So you could certainly go to natso.com and look into joining NATSO, or you can reach out to me directly at Schulte, that's SCHULTE, at natso.com, and love to have your conversation with you.
Darren, I've really enjoyed catching up with you again. It's been way too long, so thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your kindness and having me on. I enjoyed it, and be happy to be on anytime in the future. Anything I can do to assist folks.
We'd love to have you back. Well, thanks again, and thank you for listening to The Future of Convenience. You've been listening to the Future of Convenience podcast, produced by Dan Munford, Nick Scherzer, Jenna Ferguson, and Lorraine Evans. It is produced, edited, and mixed by Carolyn, Schnare, and music is provided by Jukebox Music. Tune in every other Friday for new episodes, and please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Learn more at globalconveniencestorefocus.co.uk.